First of all, I want to say thank you, everyone, for being here. This is not how I wanted the world to meet my son, but here we are. So, as you know, I'm Christine Wells Wansley. I am Nolan Wells' mom. And Nolan is the kindest soul. He never met a stranger. He loved everybody. He didn't care if you were black, white, purple, green, looked like a marshmallow. Like, he just wanted everyone to be in peace with one another. He loved life, and God gave him this big heart, which always scared us. Me and his dad had conversations with him all the time, not just about the importance of understanding our history as black people, but also the importance of how you have to move in certain spaces. And it's not us being, feeding into racism or the stereotypes that comes with that. Unfortunately, that is just a matter of fact. There have been many cases, many instances that shows it's unfortunately a pattern that he did not like. He did not like that there was so much division, and I think that's why God gave him us. He was really a peacemaker. He wanted, like I said, everyone to be included. He never wanted to leave anyone out. He just, even at a young age, I don't know, he was, how old was he?
18?
No, not 18. When he was a baby, he did a little dance. So his father and I were having a moment, and as couples do, and even in that moment, he runs in the room with his diaper on, of course, and he starts dancing because it was like he could feel the tension. He could feel that something wasn't right. So he was just a special kid. Like, he was a special kid, but again, just heart was so big. And we're gonna miss him dearly. But we are grateful, especially to our friend Tashima, who actually was one of the people who helped us that night. She went and picked up his cell phone from where it was, and then provided that to us, because we of course contacted authorities to figure out who to do the report with, whether it was the county or the city, which then turned into DMR, who I contacted immediately from there. But
Tell them how you got the cell phone.
So our friend actually, when I called her, Nolan is best friends with her two sons, Jalen and Javon. When I called her, I said, Tashima, have you seen Nolan? He's missing. No one has seen him. No one has talked to him. The boys were actually with her sons, so they opened up their Snapchat, because a lot of the kids do have their locations where they're tracking one another. So one of the boys says, well, it's showing that, I can't exactly remember what his location was showing, but my Life 360 location was showing something completely different. It was actually showing that his phone was like he was on land. And so we ended up, she received the phone from that parent, and then we met up where his car was, which was at a separate location.
There are some cases where the hardest question isn't who did it. It's whether the truth has already been spoken, and nobody realizes which version of the story to believe. An 18-year-old leaves for what should have been an ordinary summer trip with friends. Hours later, he is gone. Days after that, his body is discovered. But before investigators can answer how he died, Another mystery begins to consume everyone following the case. Two people describe his final decision. Both stories cannot be true. If you appreciate carefully researched true crime that separates confirmed facts from online speculation, consider subscribing. We follow developing investigations with verified reporting and thoughtful analysis, giving every case the time and care it deserves. There is something unsettling about the way memories change after tragedy. Most people assume that when something terrible happens, everyone who witnessed it remembers exactly the same sequence of events. Reality is often far more complicated. Memory isn't a surveillance camera. It's personal, emotional, imperfect, and sometimes two sincere people can remember the same afternoon in completely different ways. But occasionally, the differences aren't small. Sometimes the differences determine the direction of an entire criminal investigation. That's where the Nolan Wells case now stands. For investigators, every interview matters. Every phone record matters. Every GPS coordinate matters. Every minute matters. Because somewhere between an afternoon on Mississippi's Gulf Coast and a heartbreaking discovery 2 days later lies the answer to a question Nolan's family still asks every single day. What really happened? Before discussing the investigation, it's important to remember who Nolan was beyond the headlines. Too often, true crime stories begin with tragedy, reducing a person's entire life to the worst day they never expected would arrive. Friends describe Nolan differently. They remember someone who enjoyed being around people, someone whose future conversations centered around football, family, and whatever came next after graduation. People who knew him don't begin their stories by talking about investigations or autopsies. They remember laughter. They remember encouragement. They remember a teenager still figuring out adulthood, just like countless others across America every summer. That matters, because when cases become national stories, it's surprisingly easy for a person's identity to disappear behind evidence charts, legal terminology, and social media debates. Nolan wasn't born as a headline. He became one, and those are two very different things. The 4th of July weekend should have been simple. Friends, boats, the Mississippi Sound. Warm weather stretching across the Gulf Coast. Horn Island has long attracted visitors looking for a day away from the mainland. From a distance, it looks peaceful, a narrow barrier island where the horizon seems endless and time slows down. But barrier islands possess a deceptive quality. Beautiful landscapes can also become unforgiving environments. Changing tides, strong currents, rapid weather shifts, long distances from immediate help. It's the kind of place where small decisions sometimes carry enormous consequences. Nobody boarding a boat that morning expected the trip to become part of a national conversation, at least not according to anything investigators have publicly confirmed. The group eventually arrived at Horn Island, joining countless other holiday visitors enjoying the summer weekend. For hours, everything appeared ordinary. People talked, swam, walked along the shoreline, took photographs, enjoyed the afternoon. If someone had quietly asked everyone there to predict which day from their lives would later be examined frame by frame across television broadcasts, podcasts, and internet forums, no one would have pointed to that afternoon. But hindsight has a cruel habit of turning ordinary moments into clues, and that's exactly what happened here. Investigators eventually began reconstructing those hours with extraordinary precision. Not because every moment seemed suspicious, because after someone dies unexpectedly, every ordinary moment suddenly becomes important. Who spoke with whom? Who walked away first? Who remained on the beach? Who boarded which boat? Who remembers what? Those questions sound simple. They rarely are. As public attention intensified, another story unfolded alongside the official investigation. The internet started conducting its own investigation. Videos circulated. Old photographs resurfaced. Anonymous claims spread across social media faster than authorities could confirm or deny them. Some posts generated millions of views within hours. Others disappeared almost as quickly after being challenged. This has become one of the defining characteristics of modern investigations. Information travels instantly. Verification does not. That's an uncomfortable reality because audiences naturally want answers immediately. Families want answers immediately. Journalists want answers immediately. Investigators probably want answers immediately too. But evidence rarely works on internet timelines. It unfolds according to science, interviews, laboratory testing, digital analysis, and painstaking review. That process often feels frustratingly slow. Yet it's designed that way for a reason. A rushed conclusion can become just as damaging as no conclusion at all. Still, waiting doesn't stop people from filling silence with theories. And silence surrounded this case almost from the beginning. As more details emerged, one question quietly gained importance. It wasn't about forensic evidence. It wasn't about cell phone data. It wasn't even about the autopsy. It centered on something remarkably ordinary. A conversation. Just a conversation between two young people before they went separate directions. At first glance, that hardly sounds significant. But investigators often discover that the final conversation someone has before disappearing becomes one of the most valuable pieces of evidence available. Not because conversations predict tragedy, because they reveal intention. Where did someone plan to go? Who did they expect to meet? What decision had they already made? Intent matters. And in Nolan's case, public reporting eventually revealed two very different descriptions of that final decision. One version suggested he intended to leave with friends. Another suggested he planned to remain behind. Only one can accurately reflect what happened. Or perhaps, neither tells the complete story. That possibility deserves consideration too. Human experiences rarely fit neatly into either-or categories. Plans change. People hesitate. Someone can intend one thing at 3 o'clock and choose something completely different 20 minutes later. Investigators understand this. That's why they don't rely on a single interview. They compare statements against objective evidence, GPS records, phone activity, digital timestamps, witness accounts, surveillance footage whenever available. Every independent source either strengthens or weakens a particular version of events. And that's where this investigation began, moving beyond memory into measurable facts. Unlike human recollection, technology leaves silent footprints. A cell phone connects with towers. A boat records movement. A navigation system logs locations. Electronic devices don't experience stress or emotion. They simply record. Those records cannot explain motive. They cannot identify intention. But they can establish where people and equipment were located at specific moments. Sometimes those details quietly reshape an investigation. Sometimes they raise entirely new questions. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. Because once investigators started assembling those digital footprints, the timeline became clearer in some places, and far more mysterious in others. One discovery would eventually force everyone to reconsider the final hours before Nolan disappeared. Not because it answered the mystery, because it exposed just how many pieces were still missing. And strangely enough, the next breakthrough wouldn't come from a witness at all. It would come from technology that had been recording the entire time without anyone realizing how important those records would become. Part 2. Technology has an unusual way of telling stories. It doesn't care about public opinion. It doesn't follow headlines. It has no interest in defending anyone or accusing anyone. It simply records what it was designed to record, leaving investigators to determine what those records actually mean. That distinction matters. A GPS track can show where a vessel traveled, but it cannot explain why it traveled there. A timestamp can establish when something happened, but it cannot reveal what people were thinking in that exact moment. Those missing pieces still belong to investigators, witnesses, forensic experts, and ultimately, the legal process. As authorities continued reviewing the events surrounding Nolan Wells's final day, attention gradually shifted toward one of the most objective forms of evidence available: the movement of the boat itself. Unlike memories, navigation systems leave behind digital breadcrumbs. Every departure, every stop, every return, every unexpected movement. Individually, those details might appear routine. Viewed together, they begin forming a timeline that investigators can compare against witness interviews. It's a process used in countless investigations, not because technology never makes mistakes, but because independent data gives detectives something solid to measure human recollections against. According to publicly reported information, the group departed the mainland that morning and eventually reached Horn Island. For much of the day, there was nothing publicly indicating anything unusual. People spent time enjoying the island. Conversations came and went. Groups separated and reunited. The rhythm resembled countless holiday outings that had happened before. Then the afternoon approached, and this is where investigators became especially interested. Public reporting indicates that when the boat eventually departed the island, Nolan Wells was no longer aboard. That single fact transformed an ordinary boating trip into a criminal investigation whose full scope was still developing. The obvious question immediately followed. When exactly did that separation happen? Not when was it discovered. When did it actually happen? Those are two entirely different questions. A missing person investigation often begins long after the critical moment has already passed. Sometimes minutes later, sometimes hours, occasionally even days. Determining that exact point can dramatically change how investigators interpret everything surrounding it. That's why detectives often describe building a timeline like assembling a puzzle with pieces arriving from different boxes. One witness remembers a conversation. Another recalls where someone was standing. Digital records confirm a location. Phone activity establishes another. Security footage adds something else. Eventually, the scattered fragments begin fitting together. But not always completely. The Nolan Wells investigation still contained gaps. Important ones. As public interest intensified, another development emerged that quickly became one of the most discussed aspects of the case. An emergency call involving the boat. Reports indicated that the vessel experienced mechanical problems while in the area around Horn Island. According to publicly released information, assistance was requested after the boat reportedly began taking on water. Anyone familiar with boating understands why such a call immediately commands attention. Mechanical failures on open water are taken seriously. Conditions can deteriorate rapidly. What begins as a manageable problem can become dangerous in a surprisingly short amount of time. But for investigators examining Nolan's disappearance, the emergency call raised questions extending far beyond the mechanical issue itself. Not because the breakdown automatically explained what happened, because of where and when it occurred. Publicly available reporting suggested the distress location was within the same general region where Nolan's body would later be discovered. Notice the wording. The same general area. That is not the same as saying investigators confirmed the two events are directly connected. Those are very different conclusions. It's tempting during high-profile investigations to draw straight lines between every significant event. Real investigations rarely work that cleanly. Experienced detectives usually begin by asking a different question. What can we actually prove? Everything else remains a possibility, not a fact. That careful distinction protects investigations from becoming driven by assumptions instead of evidence. Still, coincidences deserve examination, not immediate acceptance, not immediate dismissal. Examination. The reported overlap between the boat's distress location and the eventual recovery area naturally became one of those points investigators would almost certainly examine carefully. Marine environments introduce variables unfamiliar to most people. Currents shift. Wind changes. Tides rise and fall. Objects entering the water rarely remain exactly where they entered. That means investigators often rely on specialists who study water movement, environmental conditions, and drift patterns. Their work helps determine what is physically possible. Sometimes their findings support existing theories, Sometimes they completely overturn them. Until those analyses are complete, responsible reporting requires restraint. And restraint became increasingly important as online speculation accelerated. Social media rarely rewards patience. Instead, it rewards certainty. Unfortunately, certainty often arrives long before evidence does. Within days, countless theories circulated online. Some accused specific individuals, others claimed conspiracies. Still others presented unverified rumors as established facts. Many attracted enormous audiences. Few included supporting evidence. It's one of the greatest challenges facing modern criminal investigations. Investigators must now pursue two separate tasks simultaneously: finding the truth and correcting misinformation. Those missions frequently compete with each other. Every hour spent addressing false claims is an hour investigators cannot devote elsewhere. That doesn't mean public interest is harmful. Far from it. Public attention has solved numerous cases. Witnesses come forward. Forgotten photographs resurface. Critical tips arrive. But effective public involvement depends on accuracy. Otherwise, noise begins drowning out useful information. Meanwhile, Nolan's family continued living a reality very different from the one unfolding online. For viewers, each new update appeared as another headline. For them, every update represented another day without complete answers. Imagine waking each morning knowing strangers across the country are debating your son's final hours while you still don't know exactly what happened yourself. That emotional burden is difficult to fully appreciate. Grief already demands enormous strength. Uncertainty demands something different. It asks families to continue functioning while fundamental questions remain unanswered. Many describe that experience as living between two realities. One where hope refuses to disappear, another where painful possibilities grow impossible to ignore. During this period, the Wells family repeatedly emphasized a simple request. They wanted the investigation to remain focused on verified facts. That message reflected a broader concern, increasingly shared by investigators across many high-profile cases. Speculation can become so widespread that correcting it becomes almost impossible. One inaccurate claim gets repeated often enough. Eventually, people remember hearing it. They simply forget where it came from. That phenomenon has a name in psychology: the illusion of truth effect. The more frequently people encounter a statement, the more believable it begins to feel, even without evidence. True crime audiences should recognize this tendency because it influences nearly every major investigation covered online. The Nolan Wells case became another example. Several claims generated enormous attention before later reporting challenged or clarified them. Each correction served as an important reminder. Being first is not the same as being right. That lesson would become even more significant as another individual unexpectedly entered public conversation, not through an interview, not through a press conference, but through someone who knew her best: her family. Their decision to speak publicly would introduce an entirely different perspective on Nolan's final known moments. And unlike many online rumors, this account came attached to a real name, a real family, and a version of events that differed in one crucial way from what many people had already accepted as fact. By itself, it didn't solve the mystery, but it fundamentally changed the questions investigators and the public needed to ask next. For days, the public conversation revolved around one simple assumption. If enough people repeated the same version of events, eventually it would begin to feel like the only version. That isn't how investigations work. Experienced detectives know that consensus can be misleading. 10 people can confidently repeat the same story, not because all 10 witnessed it independently, but because people naturally influence one another's memories after a traumatic event. It's one reason investigators often separate witnesses before conducting interviews. Independent recollections are usually more valuable than stories shaped through group discussion. That brings us to one of the most important developments in the Nolan Wells investigation. A young woman whose name had remained largely outside public discussion suddenly became central to understanding the final hours before Nolan disappeared. Not because investigators identified her as a suspect, not because authorities accused her of wrongdoing, but because she may have been one of the last people known to have spoken with Nolan while he was alive. Public reporting identified her as Katie. For nearly 2 weeks, very little was publicly known about her. In today's digital world, that's surprisingly unusual. Major investigations often result in an overwhelming amount of information, some accurate, some completely false, circulating online within hours. Yet in this case, one of the individuals connected to Nolan's final afternoon remained almost entirely absent from public conversation. That absence created a vacuum. And whenever a vacuum exists, speculation rushes in to fill it. Online investigators began asking questions. Who was she? Why hadn't she spoken publicly? Did investigators know more than they were saying? Was she cooperating? Every unanswered question seemed to generate 3 more. But there is another way to view that silence. Not as evidence, as privacy. Imagine discovering that a brief conversation you had during what felt like an ordinary holiday outing had suddenly become one of the most analyzed moments in a nationally followed investigation. Every word you remembered would suddenly matter. Every detail would be questioned. Every inconsistency, real or perceived, would be dissected online. That is an extraordinary burden for anyone, especially someone who never expected to become part of a tragedy. Eventually, members of Katie's family decided to address the growing speculation publicly. Their message was measured. According to publicly reported statements, they confirmed that Katie had spent time with Nolan that afternoon before leaving Horn Island safely on a different boat. They also stated that she had spoken with investigators and had shared everything she remembered. Those statements accomplished something important. They corrected one rumor that had spread rapidly online, that Katie herself had somehow gone missing. According to her family, that simply wasn't true. She had returned home safely. In a case already overwhelmed by uncertainty, correcting even one false narrative mattered. But another part of the family's statement drew even greater attention. It involved Nolan's intentions. According to publicly reported accounts, Katie remembered Nolan telling her he planned to return to the boat with his friends before leaving the island. That recollection immediately became one of the most significant details in the entire investigation. Because another publicly discussed version of events suggested something different. According to reporting on statements attributed to members of the friend group, Nolan had supposedly decided to remain behind voluntarily. Those accounts describe 2 very different choices. One suggests someone preparing to leave. The other suggests someone choosing to stay. Both cannot accurately describe the exact same moment. At least not without additional context investigators have not yet released. Notice what makes this contradiction so significant. It's not simply about memory. It's about direction. One decision points toward returning home. The other points toward remaining on the island. If investigators can determine which version more closely matches the available evidence, they may better understand everything that happened afterward. But investigators rarely decide credibility based on a single interview alone. Instead, they ask a different question. Which version fits the objective evidence? That means comparing statements against digital records, against phone activity, against GPS movements, against photographs, against timestamps, against every independent source available. It's painstaking work, sometimes frustratingly slow, but it is the only responsible way to separate assumption from fact. There is another possibility investigators often consider. People change their minds. Human decisions are rarely frozen in time. Someone might genuinely intend to leave. Then an unexpected conversation occurs. Plans shift. Another opportunity appears, or perhaps something entirely unforeseen interrupts those plans. That possibility cannot be ignored either. Until investigators establish a clearer sequence of events, certainty remains out of reach. And certainty is exactly what many people online demanded almost immediately. That difference between public expectation and investigative reality has become one of the defining themes of this case. The internet asks questions in seconds. Investigations answer them over weeks, months, and sometimes years. While attention focused on conflicting recollections, another category of evidence quietly continued developing behind the scenes. Forensic evidence. Unlike witness interviews, forensic examinations rarely produce immediate answers. Laboratory analysis requires time. Independent reviews require additional time. Medical findings must be carefully documented before conclusions are released. Each stage exists to protect accuracy. Because once an official conclusion becomes public, correcting mistakes becomes extraordinarily difficult. In Nolan's case, both official and independent examinations attracted enormous public interest. His family sought additional review through an independent autopsy, reflecting a desire shared by many families facing sudden, unexplained loss. Independent examinations are not unusual in high-profile cases. They don't automatically imply disagreement with official findings. Sometimes they confirm existing conclusions. Sometimes they identify questions requiring further study. Sometimes they simply provide families with greater confidence that every possibility has been carefully examined. That reassurance can matter deeply, especially when families continue searching for answers. As those medical reviews progressed, another important development quietly moved the investigation into a new phase, not a conclusion, a process. Public officials confirmed that the investigation would ultimately be presented to a grand jury. That announcement generated immediate reactions across news coverage and social media. For some observers, it appeared to signal that criminal charges were imminent. Others interpreted it very differently. Here's where legal terminology becomes important. A grand jury is not a trial. It does not determine guilt. It does not decide punishment. Its purpose is to review evidence presented by prosecutors and determine whether sufficient legal grounds exist for criminal charges. In many jurisdictions, grand jury review is a routine procedural step in certain categories of investigations. Its existence alone does not establish that a crime has been proven, nor does it eliminate that possibility. It simply means the investigative process continues through the legal system. That distinction often becomes blurred in public discussion. Legal procedures sound dramatic, but many are simply standard steps required before any courtroom proceedings can begin. Still, announcements involving grand juries inevitably attract attention, because they signal movement. Families waiting for answers often see them as signs that the investigation is progressing, even if the final destination remains unknown. For Nolan's loved ones, every procedural step represented something more than legal paperwork. It represented hope. Hope that somewhere within interviews, forensic analysis, digital records, and physical evidence lay an explanation capable of answering the question that had haunted them since the day he disappeared. What happened during those missing hours? Unfortunately, that answer had still not arrived, and while investigators continued gathering evidence, another voice entered the public conversation. Not from inside law enforcement, not from the Wells family, but from someone with first-hand experience watching another high-profile case move through the same local justice system. His comments would ignite an entirely different debate, not about what happened on Horn Island, but about what should happen next. Every investigation has two separate stories unfolding at the same time. The first is the search for what happened. The second is the public's confidence in the people trying to find out. Those two stories don't always move together. Sometimes investigators make steady progress while the public believes nothing is happening. Other times, dramatic public announcements create the impression of rapid movement, even though the most important evidence is still being examined behind closed doors. The Nolan Wells investigation reached that crossroads as attention shifted from the shoreline to the justice system itself. Families naturally want action. Communities want accountability. Investigators want certainty. But certainty rarely arrives on demand. As discussions surrounding the case intensified, legal experts and former public officials began offering their own interpretations of what the investigation's next steps might mean. Some urged patience. Others questioned whether enough had already happened to justify stronger action. The difference between those viewpoints became part of the broader conversation surrounding Nolan's death. One experienced legal voice publicly expressed concern about the pace of the investigation, pointing to previous cases that had passed through the same district attorney's office. Those comments reflected that individual's personal experiences and opinions, not official findings in Nolan's case. Even so, they resonated with many people already struggling to understand why so many important questions remained unanswered. For the Wells family, however, the focus remained much simpler. They weren't asking the public to decide guilt. They were asking investigators to uncover the truth. Those are very different requests. Truth comes first. Accountability, if supported by evidence, comes later. It's an order that can feel painfully slow for grieving families, but it's also the order the justice system depends upon. Every rushed conclusion carries consequences. A mistaken accusation can permanently damage innocent lives. An incomplete investigation can leave critical evidence undiscovered. That's why investigators often resist public pressure to move faster than the evidence allows. Behind every press conference lies countless hours the public never sees. Investigators reviewing phone records, forensic analysts comparing digital data, marine specialists evaluating environmental conditions, medical professionals examining findings that require careful interpretation. None of those processes make dramatic television, yet together they often determine whether a case ultimately succeeds or fails. One piece of evidence expected to become especially important had not yet been fully examined: Nolan's cell phone. Modern smartphones are extraordinary repositories of information. Messages, call logs, location history, photographs, videos, application activity, search history, connected devices. Every digital interaction has the potential to answer questions or create entirely new ones. Investigators know that phones often preserve the final ordinary moments before extraordinary events occur. Sometimes those records establish where someone intended to go. Sometimes they reveal who they trusted. Sometimes they contradict witness statements. And sometimes they simply confirm what everyone already believed. The challenge is that extracting reliable information from digital devices is rarely immediate. Proper forensic examinations must preserve evidence while ensuring it remains legally admissible. Any shortcuts can jeopardize future court proceedings. Public reporting indicated that both investigators and experts representing Nolan's family had agreed to jointly examine the phone, an arrangement intended to promote transparency and reduce future disputes about the findings. That agreement was significant, not because it guaranteed answers, because it suggested both sides recognize the importance of reviewing the evidence together rather than separately. At the time of reporting, however, that examination had not yet taken place. For Nolan's parents, it became another item on an already long list of things still pending. First came the search, then recovery, then official examinations, then independent examinations, then meetings with prosecutors. Now, another wait. Waiting became part of everyday life. People often imagine grief as overwhelming emotion. Many who have experienced profound loss describe something different. Administrative grief, the endless appointments, the paperwork, the phone calls, the meetings, the repeated explanations, the waiting. Every completed step leads to another. Every answer uncovers another question. For families living through criminal investigations, mourning rarely happens in isolation. It unfolds alongside legal procedures that continue long after public attention begins fading. Yet in Nolan's case, public attention wasn't fading. If anything, it continued growing. National media organizations expanded coverage. Legal commentators analyzed developments. Social media creators debated theories. Every update generated fresh discussion. Some of that attention undoubtedly kept pressure on the investigation. But attention also brought another problem: threats. According to official statements released by federal authorities, The FBI's involvement centered not on taking over the death investigation itself, but on addressing reported threats directed toward individuals connected to the case. That distinction deserves careful attention. Federal involvement often leads people to assume investigators suspect a federal crime. In this instance, publicly available information indicated something different. The reported threats themselves crossed state lines, placing them within federal jurisdiction. The death investigation remained under local leadership. The federal inquiry focused on alleged intimidation and harassment. It's an unfortunate reality that many high-profile cases now produce secondary victims. Family members, witnesses, friends, investigators, even people whose only connection to the case is having been present that day can suddenly find themselves targeted by strangers convinced they already know what happened. No investigation benefits from threats. Witnesses become reluctant. Families endure additional trauma. Public discussion becomes increasingly hostile. Most importantly, intimidation has the potential to interfere with the search for truth itself. Whatever happened to Nolan Wells, resolving that question requires evidence, not fear. The Wells family repeatedly emphasized that point. Throughout public appearances, they consistently urged supporters to remain peaceful. That message never appeared accidental. It was repeated often enough to suggest deep personal conviction. They wanted answers, but they did not want anger to define Nolan's memory. That distinction speaks volumes. It would have been understandable for grief to evolve into bitterness. Instead, public statements remained remarkably consistent. Seek the truth, respect the process, keep the demonstrations peaceful. Remember Nolan for the person he was, not only for the mystery surrounding his death. Those words became increasingly meaningful as another difficult milestone approached. The investigation continued. The questions remained. But life, however painfully, continued moving forward. Soon, Nolan's family would face something no parent ever imagines planning. Not another meeting, not another interview, a funeral. And even in preparing to say goodbye, they made a decision that reflected everything they had been saying since the beginning. They wanted the day to celebrate the young man they loved, rather than allowing the unanswered questions to become the only story people remembered. There are moments when grief becomes impossible to postpone. For days, Nolan Wells' family had balanced two lives at once. One life belonged to the investigation, the other belonged to the son they had lost. During interviews, they spoke about evidence. Behind closed doors, they were selecting photographs. During meetings with attorneys, they discussed timelines. At home, they were choosing music for a service they never imagined they would have to plan. That contrast is difficult to comprehend unless you've lived through it. 1 hour, you're answering questions about legal procedures. The next, you're trying to decide which memories best capture a lifetime. No parent prepares for that. Publicly released funeral arrangements reflected something that had remained remarkably consistent throughout the family's statements. They wanted the gathering to celebrate Nolan's life, not simply mourn his death. That choice says something profound about the way families preserve memory after tragedy. When someone dies under mysterious circumstances, the investigation often threatens to consume everything else. Eventually, people remember the headlines more vividly than the person. Friends become witnesses. Parents become family representatives. A teenager becomes the victim. Those labels serve legal purposes. They do not tell a life story. By choosing a celebration of life, Nolan's family appeared determined to reclaim that story. They wanted people to remember the young man before they remembered the mystery. Former teammates remembered someone who encouraged others, even when the spotlight wasn't on him. Teachers described a respectful student whose future still felt wide open. Friends remembered conversations that had nothing to do with investigations or courtrooms. Those recollections matter because they restore something crime coverage often unintentionally removes. Identity. A person's final chapter should never erase every chapter that came before it. As preparations continued, support arrived from both local community members and nationally recognized public figures. Public reporting indicated that several well-known individuals offered assistance to the family, helping relieve some of the financial and logistical burdens that accompany an unexpected loss. Those gestures attracted headlines, but quieter acts of kindness often carry equal weight. Neighbors delivering meals, former classmates sharing memories, coaches reaching out, community members attending vigils, people standing together simply because they recognized another family's pain. Those moments rarely become national news. Yet for grieving families, they are often remembered long after television cameras leave. Support has a way of reminding people that tragedy doesn't only reveal loss. Sometimes it reveals compassion. At the same time, investigators continued working behind the scenes. While the public focused on press conferences and interviews, forensic specialists, detectives, and prosecutors remained occupied with evidence that would likely never be discussed until the appropriate stage of the investigation. That silence frustrated many observers. Understandably so. People naturally equate visible activity with progress, but criminal investigations frequently operate in the opposite direction. The most important developments often happen quietly. An interview conducted without media attention, a laboratory result reviewed behind closed doors, a digital record verified by specialists. Those moments lack dramatic visuals. They also tend to carry the greatest evidentiary value. Patience is one of the most difficult aspects of following any developing case, especially when emotions run high. And few cases generate stronger emotions than those involving young people whose futures ended far too soon. As weeks passed, another challenge became increasingly apparent: separating verified information from assumptions. Throughout the investigation, several widely shared claims eventually required clarification after additional reporting emerged. One photograph circulating online was initially interpreted by many as evidence that Nolan had been seen after the 4th of July. Subsequent reporting indicated the image had actually been taken earlier than many people believed. Another viral recording was widely described as capturing Nolan during a confrontation. Later reporting challenged that interpretation as well, with individuals familiar with the recording identifying a different speaker. Neither correction solved the case, but together they illustrated something important: the speed of misinformation. When emotionally charged stories unfold, people naturally search for pieces that seem to complete the puzzle. Unfortunately, once inaccurate information becomes widespread, correcting it is extraordinarily difficult. Psychologists sometimes describe this as belief perseverance. Even after a claim is disproven, many people continue remembering the original version more vividly than the correction. That's one reason responsible reporting matters so much in active investigations. Every inaccurate claim creates another obstacle for investigators, journalists, and families already navigating an incredibly painful situation. The Nolan Wells investigation offers an important reminder for anyone who follows true crime. Curiosity is understandable. Assumptions are dangerous. Those two ideas can coexist. You can care deeply about a case while acknowledging what remains unknown. In fact, responsible investigators do exactly that. They ask difficult questions. They pursue uncomfortable possibilities. But they resist the temptation to treat unanswered questions as confirmed conclusions. That discipline often determines whether justice ultimately succeeds. There is another aspect of this case that deserves reflection. Much of the public discussion has understandably focused on what happened during Nolan's final hours. Yet investigations also reveal something about everyone watching them. How quickly do we judge? How willing are we to revise our opinions when new evidence appears? Do we value certainty more than accuracy? Those questions extend far beyond this single case. Every high-profile investigation tests the public's patience as much as it tests the legal system. Perhaps that's why Nolan's family repeatedly returned to the same message. Peace, truth, patience. Those aren't words people typically associate with viral news cycles. Yet they remained remarkably consistent despite everything the family endured. That consistency may ultimately become one of the most enduring aspects of this story. Not because it solved the mystery, because it demonstrated extraordinary restraint during unimaginable circumstances. Still, the central question refused to disappear. Somewhere between an ordinary holiday outing and a devastating discovery, something happened that investigators were still working to understand. The evidence continued growing. The timeline became more detailed. Digital records filled in additional pieces. Witnesses offered recollections. Experts analyzed forensic findings. Yet the most important answer remained just beyond reach. What exactly happened to Nolan Wells? That question would continue following every new development, every forensic report, every legal proceeding, every interview, because until investigators could confidently explain those missing hours, the story remained unfinished. And unfinished stories have a way of staying with us long after the headlines fade. There is a tendency in high-profile cases to believe that every new development must bring the investigation dramatically closer to the truth. Reality is often less satisfying. Sometimes new evidence answers one question only to create three more. That doesn't mean the investigation is failing. It means the picture is becoming more complete. Imagine trying to assemble a 1,000-piece puzzle while someone hands you the pieces in random order. Finding a corner piece helps. Finding another piece from the center helps too. But neither allows you to see the entire image. Investigators experience something similar. Each interview, each forensic report, each digital record, each expert opinion, they all contribute to a larger picture that often remains incomplete until the very end. The Nolan Wells investigation appears to be moving through exactly that process. Publicly available information has gradually filled in portions of the timeline. Boat movements have been examined. Witnesses have spoken with investigators. Digital evidence continues to be analyzed. Medical examinations have sought to answer difficult questions that only science can address. Yet despite all of that work, one reality remains unchanged. There are still critical moments investigators have not publicly explained. That silence has led many people to ask whether authorities know more than they are revealing. The answer is almost certainly yes. Nearly every active investigation contains information deliberately withheld from public release. There are several reasons for that. Investigators may want to protect witness testimony from becoming contaminated. They may be waiting for laboratory confirmation before discussing preliminary findings. They may possess information that only someone directly involved would know. Releasing that information too early could compromise future interviews or legal proceedings. It's understandable when the public interprets silence as inaction. But those two things are not the same. Many successful prosecutions begin with months of investigative work that remains completely invisible until charges are eventually filed. That doesn't guarantee criminal charges will occur in this case. It simply explains why investigators often reveal information carefully and strategically rather than all at once. One of the strongest themes emerging from this investigation is the importance of objective evidence. Human memory has limits. Even honest witnesses sometimes remember events differently. Stress affects perception. Time affects recollection. Conversations blend together. Details become less certain. That's why investigators consistently compare witness statements with independent evidence rather than accepting any single account without verification. In Nolan's case, that independent evidence includes technology, GPS information, digital communications, cellular data, forensic examinations. Each source tells part of the story. Together, they may eventually reveal something no single witness could fully describe. Technology has transformed modern investigations in remarkable ways. 20 years ago, detectives relied far more heavily on eyewitness testimony. Today, investigators often reconstruct movements minute by minute, using digital footprints most people never realize they're leaving behind. Every connected device creates opportunities for investigators. Phones communicate with networks. Applications record activity. Vehicles increasingly generate electronic data. Even photographs often contain hidden information documenting when and where they were captured. That technological evolution has solved countless cases. But technology has limits too. Devices record actions. They rarely explain motives. A GPS coordinate cannot answer why someone made a decision. A timestamp cannot explain emotion. Digital evidence provides facts. Human investigation provides context. The combination of both is what ultimately matters. As investigators continue their work, the legal process remains equally important. In cases receiving intense public attention, prosecutors face unique challenges. Every decision is scrutinized. Every public statement is analyzed. Every delay becomes controversial. Yet prosecutors must resist public pressure if they believe additional investigation is necessary. Justice requires more than speed. It requires confidence. If criminal charges are eventually pursued, prosecutors will need evidence capable of surviving courtroom examination. Defense attorneys will challenge every assumption, every timeline, every witness, every forensic conclusion. That is precisely how the justice system is designed to function. Questions are not obstacles, they are safeguards. Sometimes families understandably wish those safeguards moved faster. But those same safeguards exist to prevent wrongful accusations and wrongful convictions. For Nolan's loved ones, however, legal theory offers only limited comfort. Their loss exists independently of any future courtroom. Whether the investigation ultimately results in criminal charges, an accidental determination, or another legal conclusion entirely, one fact cannot change. An 18-year-old young man never came home. That reality remains at the center of everything. It is easy, particularly after weeks of following an investigation, to become emotionally invested in solving the mystery. There's nothing wrong with that. But mysteries eventually end. Families continue living afterward. When television coverage stops, when online discussions move to another case, when cameras disappear, parents continue setting an extra place in their memories for someone who will never again walk through the front door. Birthdays still arrive. Holidays still come. Graduations happen. Football seasons begin again. Life keeps moving. Grief moves with it. That may be the hardest part of all. The public experiences a case. Families experience an absence. Those are fundamentally different realities. Perhaps that is why the Wells family repeatedly encouraged supporters to remember Nolan as a person first, not merely as the center of an investigation. That request deserves to outlive every headline. Whatever investigators ultimately conclude, Nolan's story should not be reduced solely to unanswered questions. He was someone's son, someone's teammate, someone's classmate, someone's friend. Those identities existed long before this investigation and deserve to remain afterward. There is another lesson worth carrying forward from this case. In the age of instant communication, patience has become increasingly rare. Information arrives faster than ever. Conclusions arrive even faster. But truth still moves at the pace of evidence. It always has. It probably always will. Perhaps that's frustrating. Perhaps it's also necessary. Because every careful investigation represents a promise that conclusions will be built upon facts rather than assumptions. That promise matters not only for Nolan Wells, it matters for every family who may one day depend on the justice system to uncover the truth. As this case continues developing, new evidence may clarify the timeline. Additional forensic findings may answer questions that currently remain unresolved. Witness testimony may become more complete. Legal proceedings may provide greater public understanding of what investigators have learned. Until then, the most responsible position is also the most difficult one. To acknowledge what is known, to recognize what remains uncertain, and to allow the evidence, not speculation, to guide the search for answers. If this documentary has helped you better understand the facts of this case and the investigative process behind it, consider supporting the channel with a like. It helps thoughtful, evidence-based reporting reach more people. And if you want future updates as verified information becomes available, consider subscribing. We'll continue following this case carefully, separating confirmed developments from rumor and speculation. Finally, we'd like to hear your thoughts, but with one important request. Keep the conversation respectful. Focus on the verified evidence. Avoid accusing individuals without proof, and remember that real families and real people continue living through this tragedy every day. For now, the investigation continues. The questions remain. And somewhere within the evidence still being examined may lie the answer that Nolan Wells's family has been waiting for since that summer afternoon on Horn Island. Until that day comes, one truth remains beyond dispute. A young life ended far too soon, and the search for answers continues.